A child invisible to the eyes of the world reappears at the gates of a mansion. What seemed like an act of charity turns into a truth capable of changing lives forever. The last rays of sun bathed the impeccable gardens of the Bennett mansion, situated in the elegant Beacon Hill neighborhood of Boston. Shadows slowly grew as the silence that dominated the stone and glass house was interrupted only by the sound of sprinklers, maintaining the perfect lawn. Richard Bennett observed the city from his balcony. From there he could see the comings and goings of people below, small as ants in their busy lives. Having just turned 50, Richard had grey hair at his temples that contrasted with the rest of his still black hair. His eyes, a deep brown, always seemed distant, as if searching for something left behind. He wore an impeccably tailored suit, even at home. It was his uniform, his armor against the world. Richard checked his wristwatch, a gift from Emily on their last anniversary together. 5:40. It was always at this time that she appeared. As if summoned by his thoughts, the small figure emerged at the corner of the street. From a distance, she seemed just a skinny shadow approaching cautiously toward the mansion walls. Lily. This was the name Richard had heard Mrs. Jenkins whisper once. The girl walked with hesitant steps, her dark, unruly hair framing a face that, even from afar, displayed a seriousness inappropriate for her 9 or 10 years. She stopped by the kitchen gate, as she always did. Her faded dress, too big for her fragile body, swayed in the afternoon breeze. Richard could see that she was standing on tiptoe to catch a glimpse of the kitchen, from where the smell of food temptingly escaped. Observing the street girl again? Victoria's voice cut through the air, making Richard start. Victoria Bennett was the type of woman who seemed to have stepped directly from the pages of a fashion magazine. Tall, with sun-bronzed skin and perfectly styled blonde hair, she moved as if always being photographed. There was something calculated in her every gesture, from the way she tilted her head to how she slid her fingers along Richard's arm. "She's been appearing frequently," he replied, without taking his eyes off the girl. "Do you know where she comes from?" "I don't know and I don't care," Victoria answered with poorly disguised impatience. "I've told all the staff not to feed her. That only encourages her to return." Richard frowned. "She's just a child, Victoria. A child who was probably sent by someone to study our routine." Victoria adjusted one of her diamond earrings. "You know how these things are nowadays. Don't be naive, Richard." Before he could respond, Mrs. Jenkins appeared discreetly at the balcony door. The 60-year-old woman, with a face marked by deep wrinkles and kind eyes, had worked at the Bennett mansion longer than any other employee. "Excuse me." "Mr. Richard, dinner will be served in 20 minutes. "Thank you, Jenkins." Their eyes met, and he had the impression she wanted to say something more. "Is there a problem?" The woman hesitated, her eyes quickly darting toward Victoria. "No, sir. No problem." When Jenkins left, Victoria moved even closer to Richard, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We need to talk about Friday's event. The foundation is expecting you to announce the new donation. It will be great publicity for the companies." Richard nodded mechanically. Since Emily's departure, the philanthropic activities she had loved so much had been transformed into mere public relations exercises. The Bennett Foundation, created by Emily to help children in vulnerable situations, now primarily served to polish the corporate image of the conglomerate. "I'll review the speech tomorrow," he replied. Distant. Victoria left the balcony with the rhythmic sound of her heels echoing on the marble floor. Richard remained there for a few more moments, observing Lily. The girl was now sitting on the sidewalk in front of the gate, hugging her knees. There was something deeply familiar about her, something he couldn't explain. He went down the stairs and crossed the garden, walking to the outdoor kitchen. Mrs. Jenkins was there, stirring a pot of soup. She seemed surprised to see him. "Do you need something, Mr. Richard?" "That girl. Lily, isn't it? How long has she been coming here?" Jenkins wiped her hands on her apron, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe about 3 months, sir. She started appearing at the end of fall." "And she never says anything? Never asks for food?" "No, sir. She just stays there watching. Once she fainted from weakness and well," the woman lowered her gaze. "I know Mrs. Victoria forbade it, but I couldn't just leave her. I gave her bread and water." Richard felt a lump in his throat. "You did well, Jenkins." He looked through the window and saw that Lily was still there, motionless. "She reminds me of someone." "Yes, sir." The response was almost a whisper. Richard turned his gaze to the housekeeper. "Who?" Jenkins hesitated, nervously adjusting a strand of grey hair. "Her eyes, sir. They're just like Mrs. Emily's." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Emily, his Emily, who had departed so suddenly, leaving a void that he tried to fill with work and later, with a new marriage that now seemed increasingly like a mistake. "I'm going to talk to her," Richard decided, heading for the back door. "Sir, Mrs. Victoria, the house is still mine. Jenkins." When Richard stepped out into the garden, the sky was already almost completely dark. He walked to the gate, feeling a strange anxiety. Lily, seeing him approach, quickly stood up, like a frightened animal ready to flee. "Hello," said Richard, keeping his distance so as not to scare her further. "You're Lily, aren't you?" The girl didn't answer, her enormous brown eyes fixed on him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "I'm Richard," he continued. "This is my house. You come here every day, don't you?" Lily took a small step back, but didn't run away. Richard noticed her dirty, bare feet and unkempt nails. "Are you hungry?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Jenkins can prepare something for you." "No, she can't." Victoria's cold voice sounded behind him. Richard turned and saw his wife standing at the garden entrance, arms crossed and face tense. "What do you think you're doing, Richard?" "Just talking," he replied, feeling growing irritation. "With a street girl?" "And offering our food." Victoria approached, her expensive perfume invading the air. "This is ridiculous. You know nothing about her. Where she came from, who her parents are." "She's hungry, Victoria. Look at her." "There are institutions for that," Victoria retorted. "If you want to help, make a donation to the municipal shelter. Don't bring problems into our house." When Richard turned again to Lily, the girl had already disappeared into the darkness of the street. A feeling of inexplicable loss invaded him. For a brief moment, he had felt a connection with that unknown child, as if a lost part of his life had suddenly reappeared. Back at the mansion, Richard retreated to his study, the only place where he still felt some peace. There, among the books and old photographs, he could escape the farce his life had become. He sat in his leather armchair and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a photo album he hadn't opened in a long time. The images of Emily smiling at the camera made his heart ache. Emily in the mansion gardens, Emily at the beach, Emily at charity events. There was an energy about her, a light that seemed to emanate from within. How could he have forgotten that? How did he allow her memory to be slowly erased from this house? One photo in particular caught his attention. Emily at a foundation event surrounded by children. He narrowed his eyes, bringing the photo closer to the lamp. In the corner of the image, partially hidden, was a girl with large brown eyes. Richard felt his heart race. Could it be? A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Jenkins entered, carrying a cup of tea. "You didn't come down for dinner," she said, placing the cup on the table. "I thought you might like some tea." "Thank you, Jenkins." He hesitated, then showed the photograph to the housekeeper. "Look at this girl here. Do you think it could be Lily?" Jenkins adjusted her glasses and examined the image. "It's hard to say, sir. The photo isn't very clear, but—" She paused, biting her lip. "But Mrs. Emily, she visited a shelter regularly. It was in the Roxbury area. I think it was called Hope Haven. She would take donations, clothes, toys—" Jenkins paused. "In the last months before the incident, she went there almost every week." Richard frowned, trying to remember Emily mentioning this. Did she talk about any child in particular? "Not to me, sir. But she and Mrs. Victoria argued about it once." "I didn't want to listen, but—" "Victoria?" Richard interrupted, surprised. "They knew each other before. Mrs. Victoria worked as a volunteer at the shelter, sir. That's how she met Mrs. Emily. Didn't you know?" The revelation fell like a bomb on Richard. Victoria had never mentioned knowing Emily before. On the contrary, she had always implied that they had met at the business event where Richard had encountered her for the first time, months after his wife's death. "Are you sure about this, Jenkins?" "Absolutely, sir. I even saw them talking in the library once, about 2 months before Mrs. Emily left us. They seemed to be discussing something serious." Richard sat in silence, processing the information. What else had Victoria hidden from him? And what was the connection to Lily, the mysterious girl who appeared at his door every day? When Jenkins left, Richard remained in the study for hours, sifting through memories and questioning everything he thought he knew about the last 3 years of his life. One thing was certain. He needed to discover who Lily was and why she had chosen his house to appear day after day. Something told him that the answer to this question would change everything. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. The next morning, Richard woke up with his mind full of questions. The discovery that Victoria and Emily knew each other before her death deeply disturbed him. Why had Victoria never mentioned this? And what was the connection between this fact and the mysterious Lily? He went down for breakfast earlier than usual. Victoria was still asleep, giving him some time to talk with Jenkins without interference. He found the housekeeper in the kitchen preparing coffee. "Good morning, Mrs. Jenkins," he greeted, sitting at the kitchen table, something he rarely did. The woman smiled, surprised by the master's presence in what was usually an environment exclusive to the staff. "Good morning, sir. Breakfast in the dining room will be served in 20 minutes. I prefer to have it right here if you don't mind." Richard accepted the cup that Jenkins offered him. "I want to continue our conversation from yesterday, about the shelter that Emily visited." Jenkins nodded, quickly glancing at the door as if fearing being overheard. "Hope Haven, yes. It was in the Roxbury area, as I said, but—" She hesitated. "But the place caught fire about 3 years ago, sir. Shortly after Mrs. Emily left us, it was all very strange. The children were transferred to other shelters, and the land ended up being sold to a development company." Richard felt a chill down his spine. 3 years? It was right after— "Yes, sir. About 2 months later. Mrs. Victoria even organized a campaign to help the displaced children. It was in the newspapers." Richard stood up, disturbed. "Jenkins, I need you to tell me everything you know about Emily's relationship with this shelter. Was there any particular child she mentioned?" The housekeeper bit her lower lip, hesitant. "Mrs. Emily was very private about that, sir. But in the last few weeks she seemed different, more anxious. Once I overheard her on the phone talking about adoption documents." "Adoption?" Richard almost dropped his cup. "Emily wanted to adopt a child?" "I shouldn't be talking about this, sir." Jenkins twisted her hands in her apron. "Please, Jenkins, it's important." The woman sighed. "She showed me a photo once. A little girl, dark hair, big eyes. She said she was helping the girl find a home. I thought it was just another foundation project, but later I realized it was something more personal." "And this girl?" Richard hesitated, fearing the answer. "Could it be Lily?" "I can't say for certain, sir. It's been so long. But the eyes are the same." Richard ran his hand through his hair, trying to organize his thoughts. If Emily was planning an adoption before her departure, why didn't he know anything about it? They had been married for 15 years. There were no secrets between them, or at least that's what he thought. "Thank you, Jenkins. Please don't mention this conversation to anyone, especially Mrs. Victoria." The housekeeper nodded, understanding the seriousness of the request. Richard returned to his room and dressed quickly. He needed to talk to someone who could help him investigate this situation. Someone trustworthy. He thought of Thomas Rhodes, his longtime friend and the family's lawyer. If there were adoption documents in progress, Thomas would know or could find out. Before leaving, he passed by the room he shared with Victoria. She was still sleeping, her face serene in contrast to the storm of doubts now consuming him. He looked at the woman he had married less than a year after Emily's death. It was a quick, almost impulsive marriage. At the time, everyone said it was his way of dealing with grief, of moving on. Now he wondered if he hadn't been manipulated in his vulnerability. Thomas's office was located downtown, an elegant building with a view of Liberty Square. Richard entered without announcing himself, a benefit of being one of the firm's most important clients. Thomas greeted him with a genuine smile, his thin-rimmed glasses sliding down his aquiline nose. He was a 55-year-old man, thin and with precise movements, with unwavering loyalty to Richard since their college days. "Richard, what a pleasant surprise. I was just reviewing some contracts for Bennett Enterprises." "I need your help, Thomas." Richard sat down, getting straight to the point. "It's a delicate matter." "It involves Emily." Thomas's expression immediately changed. "What happened?" Richard told him everything he had discovered in the last 24 hours, the girl Lily appearing at his door. The revelation that Victoria had known Emily before, the shelter that had caught fire, and most importantly, Emily's possible intention to adopt a child. Thomas listened attentively, making occasional notes. When Richard finished, he adjusted his glasses and sighed. "It's a complex situation, my friend. Let me check if there's any adoption process in Emily's or your name in the firm's archives. If she started something, there should be records. And what about the shelter? Hope Haven? I can send someone to investigate what happened to the children after the fire. If there are records of where they were transferred, we can track them." Richard nodded, feeling slightly relieved to have shared the burden. "There's one more thing, Thomas. In the months after Emily's death, I signed many documents without really paying attention. Victoria said they were foundation things, donations, standard procedures. He hesitated. "You were grieving, Richard. It's understandable. I want you to check everything I signed during that period, especially anything related to the foundation or the shelter." Thomas frowned. "You think Victoria might have... I don't know what to think anymore. I just want the truth." Upon returning to the mansion, Richard found Victoria in the library, reviewing invitations for a charity event. She smiled when she saw him, but there was something calculated in that gesture, something he hadn't noticed before. "Where have you been all morning, darling?" "I missed you at breakfast. I had to resolve some matters at the company," he lied, observing her with new eyes. "Victoria, may I ask you a question?" "Of course, my love." She set aside the invitations, giving him her full attention. "Did you know Emily before we met?" The question caught Victoria off guard. For a brief moment her smile faltered, but she quickly composed herself. "Why do you ask that now?" "It's just curiosity. Someone mentioned having seen you together at a foundation event." Victoria adjusted herself in the chair, a gesture that Richard now recognized as a sign of discomfort. "Yes, we knew each other superficially. I did some volunteer work for the foundation. Nothing significant." "And why did you never mention this before?" "It didn't seem relevant, darling. There were just a few formal meetings. Besides," she touched his hand with false tenderness, "I always had the impression that you preferred not to talk about Emily." It was true. In the first months after his wife's death, Richard had completely shut down. The pain was so intense that he preferred to bury all memories, all traces of her. Now he realized that this behavior had created a perfect environment for Victoria to manipulate the situation. "And that girl?" he asked, changing the subject. "The one who's been appearing at the kitchen gate. Why are you so determined to keep her away?" "Richard, we've already discussed this." Victoria's voice hardened slightly. "That girl could be part of a scheme to rob us. This happens all the time with families like ours. Or maybe she's just hungry." Richard held his wife's gaze. "Tonight I want to offer her dinner. Inside the house, and that's absurd." Victoria stood up, momentarily losing her composure. "I won't allow you to bring a stranger into our house." "Our house?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "As far as I know, the house is still mine, Victoria. And this is a decision I've already made." He left the library before Victoria could protest further. In the hallway he found Mrs. Jenkins, who had clearly heard part of the conversation. "Mr. Richard," she called in a low voice, "there's something I need to show you. In Mrs. Emily's room." Emily's room had been preserved intact at Richard's insistence. It was a spacious and airy room, decorated in shades of blue and white, with large windows facing the garden. Richard rarely entered there. Emily's presence was so strong in that space that it made the pain of her absence almost unbearable. Jenkins closed the door behind them and walked to the closet. She moved some boxes at the back and retrieved a small leather diary which she handed to Richard. "Mrs. Emily asked me to keep this in a safe place in case something happened to her. She said it was important, but that it should be given to you only if it was really necessary." The housekeeper hesitated. "I think it's necessary now, sir." Richard took the diary with trembling hands. "Why didn't you give this to me before, Jenkins?" "At first you were so devastated that I thought it best to wait. Then Mrs. Victoria took control of everything, and I was afraid, sir." She made it clear that any mention of Mrs. Emily's past would not be well received. Richard nodded, understanding the housekeeper's dilemma. "Thank you for trusting me now." When Jenkins left, Richard sat on the edge of the bed he had once shared with Emily and opened the diary. The pages were filled with his wife's elegant handwriting. He began to read, feeling his heart race with each revelation. Emily wrote about her visits to Hope Haven, about the children she had met there, and especially about Lily. "Today Lily smiled at me for the first time," said one entry. "Her eyes gained a light I had never seen before. I spoke with the social worker about the possibility of adoption, and she seems optimistic." On another page, "Richard is so absorbed in business that we can barely talk. How can I tell him about Lily, about my desire to bring her into our family? I'm afraid of his reaction, but I know that when he meets the girl, he will love her as much as I do." The entry that impacted him most, however, was one of the last ones. "Victoria sought me out today, furious. She discovered the adoption papers and threatened me. She said Richard would never accept an intruder in the family, that I would destroy our marriage. I don't understand why she opposes it so strongly. Is there something more that I'm not seeing? In any case, I won't give up. Lily deserves a family, and we can give that to her." Richard closed the diary, feeling a mixture of anger and guilt. Emily had been planning to bring Lily into their lives, and he had been so absorbed in his own problems that he hadn't even noticed. And Victoria. Victoria knew everything and had deliberately interfered. When he looked out the window, he noticed that the sun was beginning to set. Soon it would be the time when Lily always appeared at the kitchen gate. This time he would be ready to receive her. As he descended the stairs, his phone rang. It was Thomas. "Richard, I found something big. There was an adoption process in progress, yes. And you won't believe it, but I found your signature on one of the preliminary documents." "My signature? But I never—" "It was signed 2 weeks before Emily's death. Apparently she initiated the process and at some point got you to sign the initial authorization." Richard stopped in the middle of the staircase, stunned. "I signed papers to adopt Lily. Yes, the process was interrupted after Emily's death, but legally there was an initial commitment." "Richard," Thomas paused. "There's one more thing. I found records of a large transfer from the Bennett Foundation to an account in the Cayman Islands, signed by you 3 weeks after Emily's death. $5 million. That's impossible. I would never authorize." "The signature appears authentic, Richard. And the final beneficiary was a company called Victoria Consulting." "Victoria. Victoria's maiden name before marriage. Thomas, I need you to come to the mansion immediately. I think I've discovered something that changes everything." Richard hung up, feeling a renewed determination. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, revealing a much darker picture than he had imagined. Victoria wasn't just an opportunistic widow. There seemed to be a much more elaborate plan behind her actions. Richard anxiously watched the clock. It was just 10 minutes, until the time when Lily usually appeared. The mansion was silent, except for the distant sound of Victoria on the phone upstairs. He had instructed Mrs. Jenkins to prepare a special dinner and leave the kitchen door unlocked. The sun was beginning to set when Richard spotted the small figure cautiously approaching along the stone path through the garden. Lily seemed even more fragile today, her hair disheveled by the wind, her dress fluttering around her thin body. She stopped a few meters from the gate, as if sensing that something was different. Richard took a deep breath and went out through the side door. Upon seeing him, Lily took a step back, alarmed. "Don't be afraid," he said, keeping his distance. "Remember me? I'm Richard." The girl nodded slowly, her large brown eyes fixed on him with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. "You come here every day," Richard continued, his voice calm. "Why?" Lily lowered her gaze, kicking a small pebble with her bare foot. For a moment, Richard thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice so low he could barely hear, she said, "The pretty lady told me it was my home." Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. "What pretty lady, Lily?" "The one in the portrait." Lily vaguely pointed toward the mansion. "She used to visit me at the shelter. She brought books. Said I would come live here one day. Emily, she was talking about Emily." Richard felt a lump in his throat. "Do you remember much about her?" Lily nodded, a small smile appearing on her face. "She smelled like flowers. She told stories and always brought chocolate. She said I would have a blue room with stars on the ceiling." The girl looked at the mansion with longing. "But then she didn't come back anymore. And the shelter got hot with smoke. I had to run. The fire. Lily had been at Hope Haven when the fire happened." Richard felt a wave of anger at the thought that she could have been hurt or worse. "Are you alone, Lily?" Where have you been living? The girl shrugged. Here and there. Sometimes with Miss Zoe, who sells pastries at the market. Sometimes at the shelter, but there are too many people and noise there. And how did you know where our house was? I came with the pretty lady once, by car. She showed me the blue room. Lily hugged herself as if feeling cold despite the warmth of the afternoon. When she didn't come back, I knew I had to come here. But the blonde woman won't let me in, Victoria. The hatred Richard felt at that moment was almost physical. Victoria knew exactly who Lily was and had deliberately kept the girl away. Lily, he said, kneeling to be at her height, would you like to have dinner with us today? Mrs. Jenkins made chocolate cake. The girl's eyes lit up momentarily but soon returned to their usual wariness. Will the blonde woman yell at me again? Again? Richard frowned. She's yelled at you before? Lily nodded slowly. When I tried to come in once. She said she would call the police, that I was a liar, that the pretty lady would never come back. Richard felt his anger grow but kept his voice calm. Don't worry about her. I promise no one will yell at you. You're safe with me. After a moment of hesitation, Lily extended her small, dirty hand. Richard gently held it and led the girl through the garden to the kitchen door, where Mrs. Jenkins waited with a warm smile. Welcome, little one, said the housekeeper. Let's clean those little hands for dinner. Lily looked at Richard, as if asking for confirmation that it was okay. He nodded encouragingly, and the girl followed Jenkins inside. While waiting in the kitchen, Richard heard the sound of heels descending the stairs. Victoria appeared at the door, stopping abruptly when she saw Lily being guided by Jenkins to the sink to wash her hands. What does this mean? She hissed, her eyes flashing with anger. I invited Lily to have dinner with us, Richard replied firmly, and she accepted. Victoria grabbed his arm, pulling him into the hallway. Have you lost your mind? Bringing a street girl into our house? What will the neighbors think? What if she steals something? She's not just any street girl, Victoria. And you know that very well. Victoria paled slightly. What are you talking about? Lily was at Hope Haven, the same shelter where you worked as a volunteer, the same place Emily visited regularly. Richard held his wife's gaze. The shelter that coincidentally caught fire weeks after Emily's death. That's ridiculous, Victoria tried to laugh, but it sounded false. I barely knew the place. I made some donations, that's all. And the $5 million transferred from the Bennett Foundation to your consulting company right after Emily's death, was that a coincidence too? Victoria's face lost all color. How did you... I discovered many things today, Victoria. Emily's diary. The adoption documents she initiated. Your interference. Richard felt his anger grow but kept his voice low so as not to frighten Lily. Why? Why did you try to keep Lily away from me? You don't understand. Victoria shook her head, her behavior changing completely. For the first time, Richard saw real desperation behind the perfectly composed mask. It was all Emily's idea, this adoption. She didn't even consult you properly. You never wanted children, Richard. Everyone knew that. She was imposing this child on you, destroying your balance. And that justifies what you did? Using her death to get close to me? To take control of the foundation? I saved you, Victoria almost shouted, then lowered her voice, looking nervously at the kitchen door. You were destroyed, Richard. Drinking every day, ignoring the companies. I brought you back. I gave you purpose again. You manipulated me at my most vulnerable moment, Richard responded coldly, and tried to erase any trace of Emily from my life, including the girl she wanted to adopt. The sound of the doorbell interrupted the discussion. Richard looked through the side window and saw Thomas's car parked at the entrance. This conversation isn't over, Victoria. Now, if you don't want to participate in the dinner, I suggest you withdraw. Lily will be staying with us tonight. Victoria seemed to want to protest, but the determination in Richard's face made her back down. This is madness, Richard. You don't even know who this girl really is. You're letting yourself be carried away by sentimentality. At least I'm not letting myself be carried away by greed, he replied, turning to answer the door. Thomas entered hurriedly, carrying a folder full of documents. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Victoria, standing in the middle of the hallway, clearly disturbed. Good evening. Victoria, he greeted her formally. Victoria shot a withering look at both of them and went up the stairs without responding. Tense situation? Asked Thomas once she was out of sight. You have no idea how much. Richard guided him to his study. Lily is here, in the kitchen with Jenkins. The girl. You found her? Thomas seemed surprised. Actually, she was never lost. She came to the mansion every day, but Victoria kept her away. Richard quickly told Thomas about his conversation with Lily and the revelations from Emily's diary. Thomas listened attentively, occasionally making notes. I have more information, said the lawyer when Richard finished. I managed to find the social worker who handled Lily's case at Hope Haven, Cecilia Martinez. She's willing to talk to us, but she's afraid. Apparently, after the fire, she was pressured to leave the city. She received threats. Threats? From whom? She can't say for sure. But she mentioned a blonde woman who appeared at her apartment 2 days after the fire, demanding all documents related to Lily. Richard closed his eyes, feeling a growing certainty that his life of the last 3 years had been built on lies. There's more, continued Thomas, about that transfer to Victoria Consulting. I discovered that the company was created just 3 weeks before Emily's death, and the money was used to buy the land where Hope Haven stood after the fire. My God, murmured Richard. What was Victoria planning with all this? From what I could gather, Thomas hesitated as if measuring his words, that land today is worth 10 times more. It's at the center of an urban development project approved by the city. A project that, curiously, was accelerated with donations from the Bennett Foundation over the last 2 years. Donations that I signed without questioning, Richard completed, feeling like a fool. It was all part of a bigger scheme. Exactly. And there's another thing. Thomas opened his folder and removed a document. I found the fire report from the shelter. It was classified as accidental, but there are inconsistencies in the report. The investigation found traces of accelerant at 2 distinct points. Are you saying the fire was deliberately set? I don't have concrete proof, but the circumstances are, at the very least, suspicious. Richard felt his blood run cold. The idea that the fire might have been deliberate, possibly to disperse the children and facilitate the purchase of the land, was too repulsive to contemplate. And Emily? He asked quietly. Do you think her death could also— Let's not go down that road yet, Thomas interrupted firmly. Emily suffered a car accident. The investigation was conclusive about that. It was a tragedy, not a crime. Richard nodded, relieved to hear this. The loss of Emily was painful enough without adding the suspicion of something more sinister. What do we do now? He asked, feeling both exhausted and determined. First, we need to protect Lily, answered Thomas. If what we've discovered is true, Victoria made a considerable effort to keep her away from you, perhaps for fear that her presence could raise these questions exactly as is happening now. She mentioned that she doesn't know who Lily really is, commented Richard, remembering Victoria's last words. What do you think she meant by that? I don't know, but we can find out. I'll check if there are birth records, medical history, anything that could give us more information about the girl. A soft knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Mrs. Jenkins appeared, with Lily partially hidden behind her. Dinner is served. Mr. Richard, announced the housekeeper, and our young guest is hungry. Lily had been cleaned up and was wearing new clothes, probably borrowed from a staff member, as they were still a bit large for her. Her hair, now combed, revealed dark curls that perfectly framed her delicate face. Without the layer of dirt, the resemblance of her eyes to Emily's was even more evident. We're coming, Jenkins, Richard replied, smiling at Lily. Are you enjoying the house, little one? Lily nodded shyly. It's big, and beautiful, just like she said it would be. Who? The pretty lady in the portrait? Richard asked gently. Yes, Mommy Emily. Richard and Thomas exchanged surprised looks. Mommy Emily? The bond between Emily and Lily seemed to be stronger than they had imagined. Lily, Thomas approached, kneeling to be at the girl's height. Do you remember when you started calling the pretty lady Mommy? Lily frowned, thoughtful. She asked me to. Said she was going to be my real mommy soon. That we just needed the paper with the long name. Adoption certificate, murmured Thomas, looking at Richard. Emily was quite advanced in the process, it seems. Richard felt his heart ache. Emily had really planned to bring Lily into their lives, and he had been so absorbed in his own problems that he hadn't even noticed. And after her death, Victoria had systematically erased any trace of this plan. Let's have dinner now, said Richard, extending his hand to Lily. Afterwards, I'd like to show you a special place in the house. Do you know which is the blue room with stars on the ceiling? Lily's eyes lit up. The princess room. Mommy Emily said it would be mine. And it will be, promised Richard with a determination he hadn't felt in years. It will be your room from now on. As they walked to the dining room, Richard looked back and saw Victoria at the top of the stairs, observing them with an impossible-to-decipher expression. Her gaze met Richard's, and for a brief moment he saw something like fear in her eyes. Then she turned and disappeared down the corridor like a shadow. During dinner, Richard observed Lily eat with restrained appetite, using utensils with surprising precision for a child who lived on the streets, another indication that Emily had spent considerable time with her, teaching her small civilized habits. "Where did you learn to use a fork and knife like that, Lily?" asked Thomas, apparently noticing the same thing. "Mommy Emily taught me," replied the girl between mouthfuls of mashed potatoes. "She said a princess needs to know how to behave at the table. And she called you princess." Richard smiled, imagining Emily with her infinite patience teaching etiquette to a shelter child. Lily nodded, a small smile appearing on her face. "Princess Lily Bennet. Pretty name, right?" Richard felt his heart skip. Lily Bennet. Emily had planned to give her his surname. It wasn't just an adoption. It was the creation of a complete family. "It's a beautiful name," he agreed, feeling tears form in his eyes. After dinner, while Mrs. Jenkins served the chocolate cake she had promised, Thomas's cell phone rang. He answered quickly and left the room to speak privately. When he returned, his expression was grave. "That was my contact at the registry office," he said to Richard in a low voice, while Lily was distracted with dessert. "They found something, a birth certificate for Lily, and—" Thomas hesitated, looking quickly at the girl and then back to Richard. "You need to see this for yourself. But not here, not now." Richard nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation. "Jenkins," he called, "when Lily finishes dessert, could you take her to see the blue room? I have some matters to resolve with Thomas." "Of course, sir." The housekeeper smiled warmly at the girl. "You'll love the room, little one. It has a beautiful view of the garden." When Lily and Jenkins went upstairs, Richard turned anxiously to Thomas. "What did you find?" Thomas removed a document from his folder and handed it to Richard. Lily's birth certificate. "Look at the full name and parents." Richard took the paper with trembling hands and read, "Lily Matthews Bennet, born May 12, 2015, mother, Sarah Matthews, father." On his eyes widened in shock. "Father, Richard Bennet." "Exactly," said Thomas gravely. "Lily isn't just a child Emily wanted to adopt, Richard. Lily is your biological daughter. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We continue." Richard stared at the document in his hands, feeling as if the entire world had collapsed upon his shoulders. The words "Father Richard Bennet" seemed pulsating, almost accusatory. "This is impossible," he murmured, running his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. "I never—" "Sarah Matthews? I don't even know this woman." Thomas maintained a serious expression, leaning forward in his chair. "I verified the document's authenticity, Richard. It's legitimate, registered in the Central Boston Registry Office. Lily was born 10 years ago at St. Mary's Hospital." "But how? I never had—" Richard suddenly stopped, a distant memory emerging in his mind. "Wait, Sarah Matthews. That name isn't completely unfamiliar to me." "I thought that might be the case," Thomas replied. "I did a preliminary search. Sarah Matthews worked at Bennett Enterprises for a brief period. Between 2014 and 2015, she was an assistant in the finance department." Richard closed his eyes, forcing his memory. That had been a turbulent period in his life. Emily and he were going through a difficult phase in their marriage. He traveled constantly, taking refuge in work to escape domestic problems. There had been some lonely nights in hotel rooms, some corporate parties where he had drunk too much. "My God," he whispered, vaguely remembering a woman with dark hair and a shy smile. "There was something. One night after closing an important contract, I was celebrating with the team. We drank too much." He shook his head, ashamed. "But it was an isolated mistake. It never happened again. And I never knew about any pregnancy." "From what I discovered," continued Thomas, consulting his notes, "Sarah left the company abruptly, citing family problems. She returned to her hometown Salem. She passed away about 4 years ago in a bus accident. Lily went into the foster care system, eventually arriving at Hope Haven. Richard felt an overwhelming wave of guilt. For all these years, his biological daughter had grown up in orphanages, while he lived comfortably in his mansion. The shame was almost unbearable. Emily knew about this, he murmured, a sudden understanding hitting him. That's why she was so determined to adopt Lily. She discovered somehow. Thomas nodded. It's a possibility. The diary you mentioned might have more information. At that moment, a sound at the door caught both their attention. Victoria was standing at the entrance to the study, her face pale and her eyes glazed. It was impossible to know how long she had been there, or how much she had heard. "So you finally discovered," she said, her voice strangely calm, "the great truth that Emily tried so hard to hide." Richard stood up, feeling his anger grow. "You knew. You knew Lily was my biological daughter." "Of course I knew." Victoria entered the study, closing the door behind her. "Why do you think I worked as a volunteer at that shelter? I was investigating rumors about a Bennett child who had appeared in the foster care system." "How did you know about this before me?" Victoria gave a bitter laugh. "It wasn't difficult. The business world is small, Richard. Sarah Matthews wasn't exactly discreet. When she found out she was pregnant, she told some close colleagues. The rumor eventually reached me, through common connections." Richard felt dizzy with the revelations. "And Emily? How did she find out?" That was the most interesting part." Victoria walked to the window, looking at the garden illuminated by the moon. Emily discovered by chance. She was making a routine visit to Hope Haven with the foundation when she saw Lily. The resemblance was undeniable. "The girl has your eyes, you know." Emily started asking questions, checked the records and found out who the mother was. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. And instead of confronting Richard, she decided to adopt the girl, concluded Thomas, observing Victoria carefully. "Exactly." Victoria turned, facing Richard. "Your precious Emily, the saint everyone adores, planned everything down to the smallest detail. She never intended to tell you the truth. She was simply going to appear one day with the girl and say she was an orphan she wanted to adopt. A complete lie." Richard shook his head, refusing to believe it. "Emily wouldn't lie to me like that." "No?" Victoria arched an eyebrow. "Why don't you read the rest of her diary? It's all there. She knew exactly who Lily was and decided to hide the truth. She planned to raise your illegitimate daughter as if she were just another one of her charity projects." Victoria's cruel words hit him like slaps. "And you?" he questioned, his voice loaded with accusation. "What did you intend by approaching me after her death? By hiding Lily from me all these years?" "At first I just saw an opportunity," Victoria admitted with surprising frankness. "A rich and vulnerable widower, prosperous companies, an influential foundation. It was perfect for me. I never planned for Lily to enter the equation. I thought she had disappeared forever after the fire." "The fire that you caused?" accused Richard. "I wouldn't go that far," Victoria smiled coldly. "Let's just say the timing was convenient for many interests. The land was worth millions, Richard. And who really cared about a handful of children without families? They were redistributed to other shelters. No one got hurt. And the documents I supposedly signed for adoption?" asked Richard, feeling increasingly horrified by the revelations. "Oh, that was Emily's masterpiece," Victoria gave a short laugh. "She put the papers in the middle of company documents that you signed, distractedly. You didn't even read what you were signing. But don't worry, I made sure those documents were never processed after her death. I had to pay some people at the registry office to permanently archive the case." Thomas stood up, clearly disturbed by Victoria's confessions. "You're admitting fraud, manipulation of official documents, possibly even criminal destruction of property. Do you realize the seriousness of this, Victoria?" "Fine, and what are you going to do?" She raised her chin defiantly. "Report me, and destroy the reputation of Bennett Enterprises in the process. Think of the scandal, Richard. The respected businessman who had a daughter outside his marriage, and then married the woman who sabotaged the adoption of his own daughter." Victoria smiled coldly. "The press will love that story." Richard felt a strange calm envelope him, as if he were observing the scene from outside his own body. "Do you really think I still care about the company's reputation? About scandals in the press? My daughter spent years in orphanages alone while I lived here, ignorant of her existence. Nothing matters more than correcting that. Be rational, Richard, Victoria approached, trying a conciliatory tone. We can resolve this in a civilized manner. The girl can stay if that's so important to you. We can create a story, say she's a distant niece or something. We don't need to expose the truth to the world. There will be no fabricated stories, Richard replied firmly. Lily is my daughter, and from today on everyone will know that. As for you, he looked at her coldly. I want you to leave my house now. You can't be serious, Victoria paled. After everything I've done for you, for us? You never did anything for us, Victoria. Everything was always for yourself, and now I see clearly who you are. Victoria looked from Richard to Thomas, realizing she had lost control of the situation. Her face transformed into a mask of fury. This isn't over like this, Richard. You can't simply discard me. I have rights as your wife. Half of all this is mine by law. I'm afraid that's not quite right, intervened Thomas, calmly adjusting his glasses. The prenuptial agreement you signed is quite specific about cases of fraud or criminal conduct, and you just admitted to several actions that fit perfectly into those categories. You have no proof, hissed Victoria. Thomas smiled slightly, removing a small device from his pocket. Actually, we have every word you said in the last 15 minutes recorded. Modern technology is fascinating, isn't it? Victoria seemed momentarily stunned, but quickly regained her composure. That doesn't matter. I have my own resources, my own connections. You don't know who you're dealing with. I suggest you take your personal belongings and leave, said Richard, opening the study door. The rest can be resolved through lawyers. With one last withering look, Victoria left the room, her heels resounding down the hallway like the distant sound of a storm moving away. She's dangerous, commented Thomas once they were alone again. She won't give up easily. I know, replied Richard, feeling the weight of the situation, but now we have something she didn't expect. What? The truth. Richard looked at Lily's birth certificate in his hands. And a reason to fight. That night Richard couldn't sleep. After Victoria had left, taking only some clothes and jewelry, he checked on Lily, who was sleeping peacefully in the blue room. The resemblance between the girl and himself was now so obvious that he wondered how he hadn't noticed before. The same eyes, the same face shape, even the way of frowning while asleep. He returned to his study and picked up Emily's diary. He needed to know the whole truth, however painful it might be. The pages were filled with his late wife's delicate handwriting, detailing her discovery about Lily. Today I met Richard's daughter, said an entry from more than 3 years ago. A beautiful girl, with his eyes and his smile. Her name is Lily. She's at Hope Haven after her mother's death. I was shocked to discover the truth, but after spending the entire day with her, I can't feel angry. How could I? She's just an innocent child, who isn't to blame for the mistakes of adults. I don't know yet how to tell Richard. He has been so distant in recent years. I fear his reaction. For now, I'll continue visiting Lily and building a bond with her. Maybe it's better this way. In a later entry, I've decided I'm going to adopt Lily. It seems the perfect solution. Richard doesn't need to know the truth, at least not now. With time, when the bond between them is strong, I can reveal everything. I know I'm hiding something important, but it's to protect everyone. Lily deserves a family, and I always wanted to be a mother. Maybe this is the universe's plan for the three of us. Richard felt tears running down his face. Emily had discovered his betrayal, but instead of confronting him with anger, she had chosen a path of compassion, trying to fix the situation in the way she considered best for everyone. And he had been so blind, so absorbed in himself, that he hadn't even noticed. The last entry in the diary, written just 2 days before Emily's death, was disturbing. Victoria Winters discovered about Lily. I don't know how, but she knows everything. She came to me today, threatening to tell Richard if I don't give up the adoption. She said horrible things, that I was trying to manipulate Richard, that the truth would destroy him. But I feel there's something more behind this. She seems obsessed with our family, with our life. There's something in her eyes that scares me. Tomorrow I'm going to talk to Richard, tell him everything. Ask him to forgive me and that together we can give Lily the home she deserves. I can't delay any longer. It's time for the truth. Richard closed the diary, feeling an unbearable pain. Emily never had the chance to tell the truth. The accident happened the morning after this entry, when she was driving to Richard's office. And now, 3 years later, The truth was finally coming to light. Morning arrived with a golden light that flooded the blue room where Lily slept. Richard, who had fallen asleep in an armchair next to the girl's bed, woke to the sound of light footsteps. Lily was standing by the window, observing the garden with fascination. "Good morning, little one," he said softly. Lily turned, smiling shyly. "Good morning. Is this room really mine now, forever?" "Forever," confirmed Richard, feeling a mixture of emotions so intense he could barely speak. "Lily, we need to talk about some important things. About you, about me, about your family." The girl sat on the edge of the bed, her small legs dangling in the air. There was a surprising maturity in her eyes, as if she had lived much more than her 10 years. "You're my father," she said simply, catching Richard completely by surprise. "How? How do you know that?" he stammered. Lily shrugged. "My mom told me before she went away. She said my father was an important man named Richard Bennett, and he lived in a big house in Boston. She said one day I would meet him, but that I shouldn't tell anyone." Richard felt his heart ache. "Your mother, Sarah, did she talk about me?" "Sometimes. She didn't get mad when she talked about you. She said things happened as they were supposed to happen." Lily frowned, remembering. "After she went away, I stayed at the shelter, and then Mommy Emily started visiting me." "And did you know who she was?" "In relation to me?" Lily nodded. "She showed me pictures of you together. Said she was your wife, and that she wanted to take me home for us to be a family. Said you didn't know about me, but that one day you would, and that everything would be okay." Richard fought against tears. The wisdom and acceptance of this small child were overwhelming. "I'm sorry for not being there for you all these years, Lily. If I had known—" "It's okay," she replied with a disarming simplicity. "I'm here now." He opened his arms, and Lily hesitated only for a moment before approaching for a hug. Richard held her against his chest, silently vowing that he would spend the rest of his life making up for the lost years. A soft knock on the door interrupted the moment. Mrs. Jenkins entered, bringing a breakfast tray. "Good morning to you both," she said with a warm smile. "I thought you might like to have breakfast right here." "Thank you, Jenkins." Richard watched the housekeeper place the tray on a small table. "Has Victoria left?" "Yes, sir. She left last night with some suitcases. She seemed disturbed." Jenkins hesitated. "Mr. Richard, there's something I need to tell you. About Mrs. Victoria and what happened right after Mrs. Emily." "You can speak freely, Jenkins. Lily is family. There are no more secrets here." The housekeeper nodded, nervously clasping her hands. "The day after Mrs. Emily's passing, I found Mrs. Victoria in her office going through personal documents. She was sorting papers, some to keep, others to destroy. I saw that there were documents with Lily's name among them. When she noticed my presence, she threatened me, said that if I mentioned anything about those papers, or about the girl from the shelter, I would lose my job and never work in Boston again." Richard closed his eyes, feeling renewed anger. "That's why you never said anything." "Forgive me, sir. I have my grandchildren to support. I couldn't risk—" Jenkins's voice faltered. "There's nothing to forgive, Jenkins. You're helping us now, and that's what matters." After breakfast, Richard received a call from Thomas. The lawyer seemed agitated. "Richard, we have a problem. Victoria was seen entering the Victoria Consulting office at 6 in the morning. My contact says she's meeting with some suspicious-looking people. Do you think she's planning something?" "I'm certain of it. We need to act quickly. I've already prepared the documents to formalize your paternity of Lily and initiate the process for permanent custody. I've also filed for a restraining order against Victoria based on the evidence we've collected." "Good work, Thomas. But what about Lily? Isn't she safe here?" "For now, yes. I've hired additional security for the mansion. They should be arriving soon. But we need to consider the possibility of leaving the city for a few days until everything is legally resolved." Richard looked at Lily, who was playing distractedly with a board game found in the room. The idea of putting her in danger was unbearable. "Maybe that's best. We can go to the country house in Newport. It's isolated, safe." "Excellent idea. Prepare just the essentials. Nothing ostentatious that would attract attention. I'll come by to pick you up in an hour." After hanging up, Richard explained the situation to Lily in the simplest and most reassuring way possible. To his surprise, the girl seemed to understand perfectly. "It's like in books," she said thoughtfully. "The wicked witch gets angry when she loses her powers and tries to take revenge. But in the end, she always loses. Richard smiled, impressed with his daughter's wisdom. "They're exactly like that, Lily, and we're already in the chapter where the good guys start to turn the game around." With Jenkins's help, they quickly prepared what was necessary for a few days away. Richard remained vigilant, watching through the windows for any suspicious movement around the mansion. Part of him still couldn't believe that Victoria represented a real danger. But another part, the one that had seen the coldness in her eyes when she confessed her manipulations, knew she was capable of anything to protect her interests. The sound of tires in the driveway announced Thomas's arrival. Richard took the bags and, firmly holding Lily's hand, headed for the door. He was about to open it when the mansion's phone rang. Jenkins answered and seconds later appeared with a pale face. "It's for you, sir," she said, extending the phone. "It's Ms. Cecilia Martinez, Lily's social worker." She seemed frightened. Richard took the phone, feeling a chill down his spine. "Cecilia, this is Richard Bennett." "Mr. Bennett," the voice on the other end was trembling, "I'm calling to warn you. Mrs. Victoria was at my apartment this morning with two men. She demanded all the original documents about Lily. When I refused, there was an anguishing pause. They threatened my family. I had to hand everything over. I'm sorry. Don't worry, Cecilia. You did the right thing to protect your family. We have copies of everything important. Are you safe now?" "Yes, I'm at my sister's house, but there's one more thing you need to know." Her voice lowered even more. "Victoria mentioned something about a DNA test. She said she would prove that Lily isn't who they say she is. I didn't exactly understand what she meant, but I thought I should warn you." Richard thanked her for the information and hung up, feeling disturbed. Thomas, who had entered while he was on the phone, looked at him questioningly. "Problems?" "Victoria is trying to gather documentation about Lily," Richard explained quickly. "And she mentioned something about proving that she isn't who we say she is." "Any idea what that means?" Thomas frowned, thoughtful. "It could just be a bluff to buy time. Or maybe what? Maybe she has some information we don't know about Lily or Sarah. In any case, it's one more reason to leave here as soon as possible." Richard nodded, taking Lily's hand again. The girl looked from one to the other with a worried expression. "Everything's fine, little one," he reassured her. "We're going to take a little trip, like an adventure. You'll like Newport. It has stone streets and old houses. It looks like a fairy tale setting." Lily smiled timidly, squeezing her father's hand. "And the Wicked Witch won't find us there?" "No," Richard replied firmly. "We'll be safe there." As they walked to the car, Richard couldn't help but look back at the mansion that had been his home for so many years. Something told him that when they returned, nothing would be as before. Their new life was just beginning, a life with Lily, his daughter, finally by his side. The journey from Boston to Newport took a little over 3 hours. Thomas drove cautiously along the winding roads that cut through the hills of Rhode Island, occasionally checking the rearview mirror to see if they were being followed. In the back seat, Lily had fallen asleep with her head resting on Richard's shoulder, who watched her with a mixture of fascination and concern. It was strange how, in less than a week, his life had changed so radically. From a lonely businessman, trapped in a marriage of convenience, he had transformed into a father, protector, and fugitive, all at the same time. And the most incredible thing was that this new reality, despite being frightening, seemed more authentic than anything he had lived in the last 3 years. "She looks a lot like you," Thomas commented, briefly glancing at Lily in the rearview mirror. Richard smiled, adjusting a rebellious curl that fell across his sleeping daughter's face. "Do you really think so? I see more of her mother. Sarah had these same dark curls. The eyes are yours, without a doubt, and the way she furrows her brow when she's concentrating." Thomas made a sharp turn, following the road that narrowed as they approached Newport. "How are you feeling about all this?" "Honestly, I'm still processing," admitted Richard. "It's a lot to absorb. Victoria's betrayal, the discoveries about Emily, and now," he looked at Lily, "discovering I have a 10-year-old daughter I never knew. It's like living in a novel. A novel with a happy ending, we hope," replied Thomas, turning onto a dirt road that led to the Bennett property. The country house was located away from the small historic town, surrounded by verdant hills and protected by an extensive stone wall. It was a colonial-style building with a terracotta roof and wide verandas, which Emily had personally decorated. Richard hadn't visited the place since before his wife's death, It was yet another memory he had tried to bury. When the car stopped in the cobblestone courtyard, Lily awoke, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Are we here?" "Yes, little one. This is our country house," replied Richard, helping her out of the vehicle. "What do you think?" Lily looked around, her eyes widening at the scenery. "It looks like a castle," she murmured, impressed. William, the caretaker who looked after the property, came to greet them. He was an elderly man with sun-weathered skin and respectful manners who had worked for the Bennets for decades. "Mr. Richard, it's good to see you again," he greeted with a slight bow of his head. His eyes, however, fixed on Lily with evident curiosity. "William, this is Lily," Richard introduced. "My daughter." The caretaker barely managed to disguise his surprise, but quickly composed himself. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Lily. Welcome to Oak Ridge Estate." Lily smiled shyly, partially hiding behind Richard. It was the first time he had officially introduced her as his daughter, and the moment had significant weight for both of them. "I prepared the house according to Mr. Thomas's instructions," continued William. "The rooms are ready, and Mrs. Gray prepared lunch. Everything is ready in the dining room." "Thank you, William. Just one more thing. We're not expecting visitors, and I'd prefer our presence here not be mentioned to anyone. For privacy reasons." The caretaker nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation. "You can rest easy, sir. No one will know you're here." The house was exactly as Richard remembered. The dark wood furniture, the handcrafted rugs, the lace curtains at the windows. There was something comforting in the familiarity of the place, as if time had stopped there. In the living room above the fireplace was the last portrait he had taken with Emily during an anniversary. She smiled radiantly at the camera, while he had that distant look that had become his trademark in recent years. "Who is she?" asked Lily, pointing to the portrait. "That's Emily, my wife who passed away," replied Richard, feeling the familiar pain tightening his chest. "The person you called Mommy Emily." Lily observed the photograph for a long moment. She was beautiful, and had a kind smile. "Yes, she did," agreed Richard, moved by his daughter's perception. "She was the kindest person I've ever known." After a substantial lunch prepared by Mrs. Gray, William's wife, Lily asked to explore the garden. Richard watched her from the veranda as she ran among the flower beds chasing butterflies, with a freedom she had probably never experienced in her years at the shelter. "It's incredible how quickly she's adapted to you," commented Thomas, joining Richard on the veranda. "As if she always knew this was her place." "I think Emily prepared the way," replied Richard. "From what Lily told me, Emily talked about me constantly, showed photos, created a positive image." He shook his head, feeling infinite gratitude. "Even after discovering my betrayal, she continued to protect my image for Lily. What kind of person does that?" "The kind of person Emily was," replied Thomas simply. "She always thought of others before herself." A comfortable silence settled between the two friends, broken only by the sound of Lily's laughter, who was now playing with the caretaker's dog. "I received some updates from Boston," said Thomas finally. "The judge accepted our emergency petition. You have temporary custody of Lily, and the police are looking for Victoria to notify her about the restraining order." "And what about Lily's legal situation?" "Am I legally recognized as her father?" "The process has been initiated, but we'll need a formal DNA test to confirm paternity, although the birth certificate is already strong evidence. The most important thing now is that no one can try to remove her from your care while the process is ongoing." Richard nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Any news about Victoria?" Thomas's expression became serious. "She didn't return to the mansion. According to my contacts, she spent the entire morning in meetings at Victoria Consulting, and—" he hesitated. And she apparently made contact with some journalists. I fear she's preparing some kind of media counterattack." Richard sighed, running his hand through his hair. "She was always calculating. She'll probably try to publicly discredit me, claim I'm mentally unstable after discovering a supposed daughter." "That would be consistent with her profile," agreed Thomas. "But we have solid evidence on our side." "And the truth, Richard." "That counts for a lot." At that moment, Thomas's cell phone rang. He answered and stepped away a few paces, speaking in a low voice. When he returned, his expression was a mixture of concern and perplexity. "That was my contact at the registry office," he explained. "Victoria was there today, trying to obtain additional information about Lily's birth registration. And apparently she's questioning the authenticity of the document. What do you mean? She claims to have proof that Sarah Matthews never had your child, that Lily is in fact the daughter of someone completely different. Richard frowned, confused. That's absurd. The certificate is official. We verified its authenticity. Yes, but... Thomas seemed uncomfortable. My contact mentioned that Victoria said something about tests that will prove the truth. I don't know exactly what she meant by that. She's bluffing, concluded Richard, although he felt a twinge of uncertainty. Trying to buy time or destabilize me? Probably, agreed Thomas, but his tone wasn't completely convincing. In any case, I've ordered increased security at the estate entrance just as a precaution. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange hues, Richard called Lily inside. The girl came running in, her cheeks flushed from outdoor exercise, her curls even more rebellious after an afternoon of play. "Dad, can I take Rusty to sleep in my room?" she asked, referring to the caretaker's dog, a golden mutt that followed her everywhere. Richard felt a wave of emotion hearing her call him Dad for the first time. It was so natural, so spontaneous, it seemed as if it had always been that way. If William allows it, why not? He replied, smiling. Lily ran off to find the caretaker, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts. He walked to what would be Lily's room, the same one Emily had decorated years ago, hoping that one day they would have children. It was a spacious room, with walls in a soft blue shade and a ceiling painted with stars that glowed in the dark. In the center was a canopy bed, covered with a quilt embroidered with wildflowers. "The princess room," he murmured, remembering Lily's words. Emily had prepared everything, as if she knew that one day Lily would be there. While arranging his daughter's clothes in the wardrobe, the few pieces they had hastily brought, Richard found, at the bottom of the backpack, a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. Unwrapping it, he discovered a broken picture frame containing a photograph of Emily holding Lily in her arms. Both smiled at the camera, and there was a genuine joy in their eyes that made Richard's heart ache. "It was the last photo we took together," said Lily, who had silently entered the room. Before she went away, Richard sat on the bed inviting Lily to join him. "Where did you get this photo?" "Mommy Emily gave it to me. She told me to always keep it, that it was proof of our love." Lily touched the broken glass of the picture frame with delicate fingers. "I hid it when the shelter caught fire. Later, when the blonde woman came and asked if I had things from Mommy Emily, I didn't tell about the photo." "The blonde woman? Victoria went to the shelter looking for you?" Lily nodded, her face assuming a serious expression. "Right after the fire, she asked many questions about Mommy Emily, about what she told me. She said she would take me to a better place, but I didn't believe her. She had cold eyes." Richard hugged Lily, feeling a mixture of anger and protection. "You were very brave, little one. And smart not to trust her. Mommy Emily warned me that not every adult wants what's best for children. She told me to trust my heart." Lily looked at Richard with a surprising intensity for someone so young. "My heart says I can trust you." "And you can, Lily, always." Richard kissed the top of his daughter's head, feeling a renewed determination. "I promise nothing will separate us now." Dinner was served on the terrace under the starry Newport sky. Lily, exhausted after a day of discoveries and play, fell asleep soon after the meal. Richard carried her to the blue room, tucking her under the covers with Rusty curled up at her feet. He watched her sleep for some time, marveling at the small life that was now in his care. Back on the terrace, he found Thomas still working on his laptop, his face illuminated by the blue screen. "I found something," said the lawyer as soon as Richard joined him. "Something that might explain Victoria's recent behavior." "What is it?" Thomas turned the laptop, showing a scanned document. "This is Sarah Matthews' complete medical history, which I managed to access through a source at the hospital where she was treated. Apparently, she suffered from a serious kidney condition, diagnosed shortly before her pregnancy. The doctors advised her not to proceed with the pregnancy due to the risks to her health. But she decided to have the baby anyway," concluded Richard, feeling a new wave of guilt for not having been present to support her. "Yes, but there's an important detail here." Thomas pointed to a specific part of the document. "During the pregnancy, Sarah underwent several specific tests, including a prenatal DNA test." "DNA test? Why?" "Apparently, because of her condition, the doctors wanted to check if the baby had inherited any genetic predisposition. And here's the result." Thomas showed another page of the file. The exam confirmed that you are the biological father without a doubt. Richard felt a relief he didn't know he needed. So what's Victoria's strategy? What does she hope to prove? I'm not sure, but... Thomas adjusted his glasses, thoughtful. There's a curious detail in the medical records. Sarah was initially pregnant with twins. Fraternal twins, 2 different eggs fertilized. But one of the fetuses didn't develop, a phenomenon known as vanishing twin. And that means that Lily was originally part of a twin pregnancy. But only she survived until birth. Richard processed the information slowly. And how does this relate to what Victoria is trying to do? I don't know for certain, but she seems to have some kind of information or theory about this. Perhaps she's trying to use this particularity of the pregnancy to create some alternative narrative about Lily's origin. Before they could discuss further, Richard's cell phone rang. He looked at the display, not recognizing the number. Hello? Richard. Victoria's cold and calculated voice sounded from the other end of the line. I finally managed to speak with you. Richard signaled to Thomas, who immediately began tracing the call on his laptop. What do you want, Victoria? Just a civilized conversation. About Lily, about our future, about the agreement we can make to avoid an unnecessary scandal. There's no agreement to be made. Lily is my daughter, and you manipulated the situation for years to keep her away. Victoria gave a soft laugh. Are you sure she's your daughter, Richard? Absolutely sure. I am, Victoria. We even have the prenatal DNA test conducted during Sarah's pregnancy. There was a brief silence on the other end, as if Victoria hadn't expected that information. Interesting. But did you know that Sarah was originally pregnant with twins? Yes, I just found out, and don't you find it curious that only one of the babies survived? That Sarah disappeared so mysteriously after the birth, that no one witnessed the delivery? Richard felt a growing unease. Where are you going with this, Victoria? To the truth, Richard. The truth that Emily discovered and tried to hide from you. The truth about who Lily really is. Stop the games, interrupted Richard, irritated. If you have something to say it now. Not over the phone, replied Victoria calmly. I want to talk in person. Just you and me, no lawyers, no police. I have documents you need to see. Exams that Emily secretly had done. What kind of exams? The kind that proves Lily is not Sarah Matthews' daughter. That she is, in fact, Emily's biological daughter. Richard felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. That's absurd, is it? Think about it, Richard. Why was Emily so determined to adopt that specific girl? Why did she keep everything secret? Why did she become so desperate when she learned I had discovered the truth? You're making this up to confuse me. Am I? Then why don't you meet me and let me show you the proof? Tomorrow at noon at Cliff Point Lookout. Come alone. If you don't come, I'll go straight to the press with the whole story. Imagine the headlines. Businessman Richard Bennett keeps secret the daughter he had with his own wife, while she lived hidden in an orphanage. The call ended abruptly, leaving Richard stunned. Did you trace it? He asked Thomas. Yes, she's in Newport. She probably followed us. The lawyer looked concerned. Richard, you can't consider meeting her alone. It's obviously a trap. But what if she's telling the truth? What if there really is something about Lily that I don't know? Think logically. How could Lily be Emily's biological daughter? That doesn't make sense. Emily would have had to be pregnant, given birth in secret, and then, for some inexplicable reason, placed her own daughter in an orphanage, only to try to readopt her years later. It's completely irrational. Richard agreed, Thomas's logic perfectly clear. You're right. It's just another manipulation. She's desperate, trying anything to destabilize me. Exactly. And about this supposed meeting tomorrow, it's obviously dangerous. We don't know what she's planning, who will be with her. Richard looked at the window of the room where Lily slept peacefully, protected under his roof for the first time. I won't risk our safety for Victoria's mind games. We'll stay here and proceed with the legal process. Wise decision, agreed Thomas. I'll reinforce the estate's security and alert the local police about Victoria's presence in town. If she tries anything, she'll be violating the restraining order. That night, Richard slept little. Victoria's words echoed in his mind, planting seeds of doubt that he desperately tried to ignore. It was ridiculous to think that Lily could be Emily's biological daughter. Completely impossible. And yet, in the middle of the night, he got up and went to Lily's room. The girl slept peacefully. the moonlight filtering through the window and illuminating her face. Richard observed her features, trying to identify any resemblance to Emily that might have gone unnoticed. Was there something in the curve of her eyebrow, perhaps? In the shape of her lips? Or was it just his imagination, fueled by Victoria's malicious insinuations? "It doesn't matter," he whispered to himself. "It doesn't matter whose biological daughter you are, Lily. You're mine now. And nothing will change that." As he returned to his room, Richard didn't notice the silhouette observing the house from the distant hill, nor the gleam of the spyglass pointed at the windows of Oakridge Estate. The night was quiet, but the storm was approaching. Morning arrived with a fine, persistent rain, the grey sky stretching over the Newport hills like an omen. Richard woke after a restless night, filled with confusing dreams where Emily, Sarah, and Lily blended into an impossible-to-decipher narrative. He got up still feeling the weight of Victoria's words, however absurd they might be. The aroma of fresh coffee and freshly baked bread filled the house. In the kitchen, he found Lily already awake, helping Mrs. Gray prepare breakfast. The girl had an improvised apron tied at her waist and held a wooden spoon with absolute concentration, stirring something in a bowl. "Good morning, Dad," she exclaimed upon seeing him, with a naturalness that warmed Richard's heart. "I'm helping make cornbread. It's the first time I've ever made it." "She has a knack for the kitchen, Mr. Richard," commented Mrs. Gray with an affectionate smile. "She learns quickly." Richard kissed the top of Lily's head, inhaling the soft perfume of her hair. "Did you sleep well, little one?" "Yes. Rusty stayed with me all night." Lily raised her face, studying Richard's expression. "And you? You look tired." It was surprising how easily she could read his emotions. "I had some nightmares, nothing serious. When I have nightmares, Mrs. Gray said it's good to tell someone. Makes the fear go away." Richard smiled, touched by the genuine concern in his daughter's eyes. "I'll remember that." After breakfast, the rain intensified, forcing Lily to stay inside. Richard found her in the library, leafing through an old photo album that Emily had organized years ago. He sat beside her, observing the images that told the story of his marriage to Emily. "You looked happy here," commented Lily, pointing to a photo of them at a beach. "And we were," replied Richard with sincerity. "At least in the beginning. Later," he sighed, trying to find simple words to explain something so complex. "Later we lost touch with each other a bit. I focused too much on work, and Emily—" "She found me," Lily completed simply. "Yes, she found you." Richard studied his daughter's face, trying to see beyond the superficial features. "Lily, may I ask you something?" The girl nodded, closing the album and giving him her full attention. "Do you know who your mother is?" "Your biological mother?" Lily furrowed her brow, thoughtful. "Sarah. She had dark hair like mine, but straight. And she was very beautiful when she smiled, which didn't happen much." The girl lowered her gaze to her hands. "She got sick when I was little. Very tired, always. Then she had to go to the hospital and never came back." "And about your father? Did she talk about him?" "Sometimes. She said he was an important man, who worked a lot. That one day I would meet him." Lily looked at Richard with a disconcerting intensity. "She never said your name, but she showed me a picture once. It was you in a magazine. You were wearing a dark suit and looked angry." The girl smiled. "You look less angry now." Richard felt a wave of emotion. "I'm sorry for not being there for you both, Lily. If I had known—" "It's okay," she interrupted with wisdom beyond her years. "Mommy Sarah used to say that sometimes people can't be together, even if they want to, and that it wasn't anyone's fault." The simplicity with which Lily accepted her complex history was both moving and devastating. Richard wanted to protect her from all pain, from all complications, but he knew that life was rarely simple or fair. "And Emily? How did you meet her?" "At the shelter," replied Lily, her eyes lighting up with the memory. "She came with other people from the foundation, bringing toys and books. But she was the only one who came back after. She always brought a different book for me, even when there wasn't an event. She said I was special." "You are special," confirmed Richard, stroking his daughter's curls. "Then she started taking me out, to the park, to the zoo. One day she brought me here to see this house. She said that one day I would have a blue room with stars on the ceiling." Lily paused as if organizing her memories. "I asked if she would be my new mom and she cried. But she said yes, that we were just waiting for the papers to be ready. And she never mentioned—" Anything strange? Never said something like that. Well, that she was your real mother. The question came out awkwardly, and Richard immediately regretted asking it. Lily looked at him with confusion. I didn't understand. She would be my mom because she was going to adopt me. She explained that adoption is when someone chooses a child to love, even without being born from her belly. The girl frowned. Why are you asking this? It's nothing important. Richard forced a smile, feeling foolish for having let Victoria's insinuations affect him so much. I'm just trying to better understand how everything happened. The sound of hurried footsteps interrupted the conversation. Thomas appeared at the library door, his face tense. Richard, I need to speak with you. In private. Lily, why don't you go help Mrs. Gray finish the bread? I bet she'd love your company. When the girl left, Richard turned to Thomas. What happened? I just received a call from the police. They found the car Victoria was using, abandoned on the road leading to Cliff Point Lookout. The location where she wanted me to meet her today, murmured Richard, feeling a chill down his spine. Exactly. But there's no sign of her. And, most concerning, they found a laptop in the vehicle with various files about Lily, you, and Emily. Plus, there was an envelope addressed to you. Thomas extended a sealed manila envelope. The police authorized me to bring it, since it may contain information relevant to your safety. Richard took the envelope with hesitation. His name was written on the front in Victoria's elegant handwriting. Inside was a handwritten letter and several medical documents. Richard, he began to read aloud, when you read this, I will already be far away. Don't worry, I won't return to disturb you. Everything I did was out of love, however distorted it may have been. I knew you long before you imagine. I briefly worked at Bennett Enterprises during the period when Sarah Matthews was also there. I saw what happened between you two, saw how she manipulated the situation to get pregnant by a rich man. Richard paused, feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. This is a lie. Sarah never manipulated me. Keep reading, urged Thomas. We need to understand what she's planning. What you don't know is that Sarah and I had a connection. We were distant cousins, although we were never close. When she became pregnant and was fired, she sought me out in desperation. Her health was failing, and she feared for the child's future. Or rather, the children, since they were twins. I was the one who helped her during the difficult pregnancy. I who was by her side at the hospital when one of the babies didn't survive. It was to me that she entrusted Lily when she knew she wouldn't survive the kidney disease that was consuming her. Richard looked at Thomas, stunned. Could this be true? Victoria and Sarah were relatives. It's possible, replied Thomas cautiously. We'd need to verify, but it would explain how Victoria knew so many details about the situation. Richard returned to the letter, his voice trembling slightly. I promised Sarah I would take care of Lily, that I would ensure she had a comfortable life. That's why I approached you, Richard. Initially, I planned to marry you, and then bring Lily into our lives as if it were a normal adoption. But then Emily interfered. Somehow she discovered about Lily and began visiting her at the shelter where I had temporarily placed her. Before I could explain, Emily was planning to adopt her without my knowledge. Richard paused, trying to process everything. She's trying to justify herself, as if her actions were motivated by some noble promise. It's a convenient narrative, agreed Thomas. But it still doesn't explain why she kept Lily away from you for so long, even after marrying you. The truth, Richard, is that I feared losing you to the memory of Emily if you discovered about Lily. I feared that, upon learning the girl was your biological daughter, you would cling even more to the past, to the life you had with Emily. So yes, I kept you separated. It was selfish, it was cruel, but it was done out of a distorted love. What I didn't tell you yesterday is that I have proof that Lily really is your biological daughter. The exams I mentioned exist, but they don't prove what I implied. They confirm without doubt that you are Lily's father. I lied about Emily being the biological mother just to create confusion, to buy time while I decided what to do. Richard let the letter fall onto the table, feeling physically and emotionally exhausted. She admits she invented that absurd story about Lily being Emily's daughter. But why confess everything now? Why simply disappear? Thomas picked up the medical documents that accompanied the letter and examined them quickly. These are legitimate from what I can see. DNA tests confirming your paternity, Sarah's medical records, even the birth report. And there's more in the letter, Richard. Richard picked up the letter again, continuing where he had left off. Now I understand that I can no longer continue with this farce. You found Lily, discovered the truth, and there's no going back. Therefore, I'm stepping away. The attached documents will give you everything you need to legally formalize your paternity. As for me, when you read this, I'll already be on my way to another country, where I'll try to rebuild my life away from all this. Don't look for me, don't try to contact me. This is the end. She's running away, concluded Thomas. She probably fears the legal consequences of her actions. Let her go, replied Richard, surprising himself with the lack of rancor in his voice. Lily is all that matters now. I don't want to prolong this drama. I don't want to expose her to more turbulence. Thomas nodded, understanding. The documents she left will greatly facilitate the legal process. With this, we can finalize the recognition of paternity without major complications. And what about the divorce? With the evidence we have of Victoria's manipulations, we can proceed with a case for fraud. She won't be entitled to a significant portion of the assets. A thunderclap shook the windows of the library, and the rain intensified outside. It was as if the sky itself was washing away the last vestiges of Victoria's presence in their lives. Dad? Lily's voice sounded from the door. She was standing there with flour on her face and a shy smile. The bread is ready. Want to try some? Richard quickly put away the letter, forcing a smile. Of course, little one. Let's go. The following hours passed in an almost surreal bubble of normality. Lily proudly showed off the cornbread she had helped make, and they spent the afternoon playing board games found in an old cabinet in the house. It was as if the outside world, with all its complications and shocking revelations, had been momentarily suspended. At night, while Lily slept, Richard and Thomas met again in the library to discuss the next steps. The police confirmed that Victoria boarded a flight to London this afternoon, informed Thomas, checking his cell phone. It seems she really is fulfilling what she said in the letter. It's better this way, replied Richard, looking out the window at the rain that was still falling. The less drama, the better for Lily. And what about you two? What are your plans now? Richard smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. Return to Boston, for starters. Lily needs stability, a routine. I'll enroll her in a good school, hire tutors to help her make up for lost time. And then, he made a reflective pause, then I want to resume the Foundation's social projects. The real projects, those that Emily created to help children like Lily. I think it's the best way to honor her memory. She would be proud, said Thomas with sincerity. Of you and of Lily. You know what's strangest? Richard served himself some coffee. In less than a week, my life has completely changed. I discovered a daughter I didn't know I had, lost a wife I never really loved, and somehow I feel more complete than I've ever felt. That's what happens when we find our true purpose, replied Thomas philosophically, and Lily is definitely yours. The next morning the sun appeared timidly between the clouds, as if announcing the beginning of a new phase. Richard found Lily on the veranda, observing the birds that returned after the storm. Good morning, little one, he greeted, sitting beside her. Did you sleep well? Yes, she replied, without taking her eyes off a hummingbird that flew nearby. I dreamed about Mommy Emily. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. Was it a good dream? It was. She was smiling, wearing a blue dress. She said she was happy because we're together now. Lily turned to Richard with a serious expression. Do you think dreams can be messages? Some ancient peoples believe so, he replied carefully. That dreams are a way for our loved ones to talk to us, even when they're no longer here. Lily nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. Then she knows. About us? I'm sure she does, little one. They remained silent for a few minutes, just appreciating the beauty of the garden washed by the rain. It was Lily who finally broke the silence. Are we going back to the big house today? Yes, it's time. We have a lot to arrange in Boston. Your school, your things. Richard hesitated. That is, if you want to go, of course. If you prefer, we can stay here longer. I want to go, replied Lily decisively. I like the big house. And my blue room with stars, just... She bit her lip, suddenly shy. Just what, little one? Just I don't want the blonde woman to be there. She scares me. Richard hugged his daughter, feeling a protective instinct so strong it almost suffocated him. She won't be there, Lily. Never again. I promise. 3 months later, the Bennett mansion in Boston was a completely different place. The gardens, once meticulously pruned into geometric shapes, now exhibited a more natural and inviting aspect. Wildflowers grew among the shrubs, and a swing had been installed in the largest tree in the yard. Inside the house, the changes were even more evident. Photos of Lily had been added to the walls, alongside the family portraits that had always been there. The oppressive silence that once dominated the environment had been replaced by music, laughter, and the occasional bark of Rusty, who had moved with them from Newport. Richard had significantly reduced his workload at the companies, delegating responsibilities to spend more time with Lily. Mornings were dedicated to school. Lily had adapted surprisingly well to the prestigious Horizon School, although she needed tutoring to make up for years of irregular education. The afternoons, when there were no unavoidable commitments, were reserved for outings, games, and long conversations on the veranda. The Bennett Foundation, once reduced to a corporate marketing instrument in Victoria's hands, had resumed its original mission under Richard's renewed leadership. Inspired by Lily's story, he had initiated a specific program for children in the adoption process, ensuring them quality education and psychological support during the transition to new families. The divorce from Victoria had been finalized without major complications. As predicted by Thomas, she didn't contest the terms, content with the modest financial agreement offered in exchange for her permanent silence about the entire situation. The latest news indicated that she had settled in Portugal, far from the social circles she frequented in the United States. On a particularly pleasant September afternoon, Richard was watching Lily play in the garden when Mrs. Jenkins approached with a cup of tea. "The girl is happy," commented the housekeeper, following Richard's gaze. "I've never seen a child adapt so quickly to such a big change." "I think in some way she always knew this was her place," replied Richard, as if she was just waiting for the right moment to come home. "Mrs. Emily would be proud," said Jenkins with a soft smile. "Of you both." Richard nodded, feeling that familiar mixture of gratitude and sadness that always accompanied him when he thought of Emily. "You know, Jenkins, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Emily had lived. If we had adopted Lily together, formed the family she so desired. Life has its ways, Mr. Richard. We don't always understand why things happen as they do. But look at you two now, father and daughter finally together. There's something right about that, don't you think?" Richard smiled, watching Lily, who was now trying to teach Rusty to shake hands. "Yes, there's something absolutely right about it." That night, after tucking her into bed, Richard sat on the edge of the mattress, watching Lily fight against sleep. "Dad," she murmured drowsily, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, little one." "Do you think Mommy Sarah and Mommy Emily know each other now? Up in heaven?" The question, so innocent and yet so profound, caught Richard by surprise. I like to think so, Lily. I like to imagine that they're together, watching over us from above." "Me too," she replied, closing her eyes. "In my dream they were together, you know. Mommy Sarah and Mommy Emily. They were holding hands, smiling at me. I wasn't scared anymore." Richard kissed his daughter's forehead, feeling an emotion so intense he could barely breathe. "There's no more reason to be afraid, little one. You're home now. Forever." When Lily finally fell asleep, Richard remained by her side for a few more minutes, marveling at the tortuous paths life had traced to bring them here. So many coincidences, so many decisions, so many secrets, all converging to this moment of perfect peace. Before leaving, he adjusted the star projector they had installed on the ceiling. Small points of light spread across the room, creating the illusion of a starry sky. The princess room, exactly as Emily had imagined. Richard smiled, feeling at peace for the first time in many years. Outside, the city of Boston glittered with its own lights, and life followed its relentless course. But within those walls, in the blue room with stars on the ceiling, time seemed suspended in a perfect moment of love and belonging.